Hi there, students. A contradistinction, a noun. To contradistinguish as a verb. Contradistinctive as an adjective, and contradistinctively as the adverb. Okay, a contradistinction is showing the difference between two things by contrasting their different qualities, by contrasting their opposite qualities. So let's see, let me make a contradistinction between London and, I don't know, Madrid. Okay, so London is a much more extended city, whereas Madrid is much more vertical. There is a clear contradistinction in the weather. One has a climate that's very hot in summer and very cold in winter, except on sunny days. Whereas the weather in London is much more temperate. Okay, it's less extreme. Okay, so to show the difference between two things by contrasting them, okay, it's a way of making clear the difference when you compare them. So I don't know. Let's try and make a contradistinction between Chinese and English. Well, firstly, the way they are written is different. The characters are different, yeah? And in English, each letter normally, more or less, represents a sound. In Chinese, some of the characters represent a sound, but others are pictograms which represent an idea. That's a clear contrast. So, yeah, I have just contradistinguished the two languages. Yes, this team is dressed in white, and contradistinctively, the opposing team is wearing a black strip. Okay, so an opposite between the two, in contrast to. You can make contradistinctions between any two things that are really rather different. Okay, so yes, the plant world in contradistinction to the animals that live on the planet. Okay, the biology is very different. Contradistinctively, one is able to move and the other, well, not really. Yeah, it's there's a clear contradistinction between the two. Let's look at the contradistinctive characteristics of the two. Normally a plant is at the temperature that surrounds it, whereas many animals, mammals for example, are warm-blooded. But this contradistinction doesn't exist with reptiles, which have to warm themselves up in the sun. So you're going to ask me, what's the difference between a distinction between and a contradistinction between? I think the base meaning is the same. Whereas I think a contradistinction is more emphatic and it focuses more on opposite things. Yeah? If there is a very subtle difference between two things, then that would be a small distinction. Whereas contradistinction, where there's a big and obvious difference between the two. Yeah? So, for example, there is a distinction between Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola, but I wouldn't say it's a contradistinction. Maybe their marketing plans have radical contradistinctions. I believe Pepsi focuses more on snacks and things like that, and that's where they make their money. Okay, so a contradistinction between two things. Yeah, they're contradistinctively different. Okay, there's a big difference between the two. Yes, let's see, both the North and South Pole are very cold, but there is one big contradistinction between the two. There are native species in the North Pole, whereas contradistinctively, there are no native creatures in the South Pole. This is a clear contradistinction between the two. I would like to contradistinguish the properties of health food as opposed to fast food. Yeah, there are lots of obvious contradistinction between the two. So there you go, to contradistinguish, to contrast between the two, to have a large difference between them. Yeah, there's a very large contrast. There's a big difference. Very commonly, A in contradistinction too. Yeah, A is different to B in these characteristics. So, formality. Let's see, a distinction, I would give a 5 in formality. You could use it anywhere. I think contradistinction, I'm going to give it maybe 6.5, 7. I'm not sure I would use contradistinction in an informal conversation. I think use it in semi-formal or formal writings. It's a good word to use in academic writings and things like that. And then as to origin, well, this comes from Latin, contra, against, and the Latin verb distinguo, I distinguish, I can tell the difference between the two. So enough. If you enjoyed the video, give it a rating, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now. Contradistinction, contradistinctive, contradistinguish.